From walking barefoot in the snow to hiking for miles for a view, it feels good to connect with our simpler side. Simplifying your wellness with Kachava's all-in-one nutrition shake feels good too. With 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and more. No fillers, no nonsense, just the highest quality ingredients. New customers get $20 off an order of 2 bags or more now through January 31st when they go to Kachava, KACHAVA.com, and use code HEALTH.
Welcome everyone to Dolls of Our Lives. This is the show where we're reliving the American Girl series book by book. I'm Mary.
I'm still Allison.
I'm just so taken by your beach scene, Allison, on your Zoom. I don't know why that has mesmerized me right now, but that's where I'm at.
So I'm actually doing a 2-part one-woman show, one part of which is my MacBook has decided that it wants to actually be a fan, and the other part is I'm using a Dell laptop, not a Dell, but a DELL. So I have a beach background, and I have my MacBook, which sounds like it's ready to operate as a full-time fan. Yes.
Wow.
So it's kind of it's a passion piece for me. So, modern computing.
This is performance art. I'm really into it. And speaking of fans, we have someone of whom we're both a fan. We have Lauren Kennedy with us today. We'll introduce her more in a moment, but we're so excited to be talking about Kit and newspapers and just all of it. Thank God we're not done with Kit yet.
I was going to say we have a Kennedy and then let people, decide which Kennedy we were able to nab. But I think we have the best Kennedy, which is Lauren.
Oh my, yes.
Who wrote to us from the Ohio History Connection. So Lauren, if you'd like to say hello to the people from the state that begins and ends with an O. Oh.
Hi, I'm Lauren. Like Allison said, I'm from the Ohio History Connection, and I also grew up in the time of Kit and American Girl dolls, and so I was interested in having a conversation with you guys today about Ohio newspapers and Kit and just chatting about it. I'm very excited.
Well, first of all, I can't go a minute further without knowing, are you of the Kennedys? Where are you at?
I genuinely have no idea, to be honest with you. I know there's Irish Kennedys and there's Scottish Kennedys, and I'm an Irish Kennedy, so maybe somewhere way back down the line.
Wow.
But I have no genuine idea.
I know someone else who is also last name is Kennedy, and she went to Brown, as did JFK Jr., and I was like, why you didn't tell everyone at Brown that you were a Kennedy? Wasted opportunity. I don't know. But yeah, we're so excited to get into this. Let's just dive right in. So I was telling Lauren off air that I'm really lucky that I've been exposed a little bit to the digital newspaper project work because my wife is the co-director of Connecticut's digital newspaper project. Shout out to her. This is not a paid spawn, but so I know the value of your work and what you do, but maybe can you tell us a little bit about your position and your project and what you get to do at Ohio History?
Yeah, so my position title is Digital Projects Coordinator, and I specifically work with the newspapers at Ohio History Connection. There are other digital projects coordinators who deal with Ohio Memory, but they deal more with photographs and correspondence and other things that are happening on Ohio Memory, and I deal primarily with newspapers. So some of the work that I do is usually I'll get a response from someone who is at a historical society somewhere else in Ohio in one of the many, many places, the 88 counties here. And they reach out to me that they've found some kind of historic newspaper, or potentially even just they've been receiving their local newspaper from just the past few years, and they would like to make sure that it is available digitally. And so we work with them to ensure that there can be a digital process for them to be not only preserved, but also accessible for other people in Ohio or outside of Ohio who would like to view either historic newspapers or even modern ones that we have access to. So we help with that process of making sure that people can do that, that these historic societies and libraries and other places doing this work have access to someone who kind of knows the steps that go into making sure that these things are preserved and digitized. And so that's kind of a very brief lay of the land of what I do there. And then even larger, there is the federal newspaper program that Mary mentioned her wife is a part of. And so that is a little bit larger. I work with Ohio Memory, but sometimes we also work within Chronicling America, which is the federally funded one from the Library of Congress, where you can also find historic and modern newspapers and kind of just get the lay of the land with their history, their important like identification numbers for them, if they're accessible, where they're accessible from. It could be multiple different states and things like that. So that is just kind of a very brief overview of everything.
Brief but comprehensive.
Yeah.
I feel like we have to ask you, first of all, how many copies you have of Hard Times, which is Kit's newspaper.
Wow.
I wish that we had many, many copies of it. However, unfortunately, we have 0. I was looking on eBay, though, to see if anyone's selling some. For my own personal use, not for the Ohio History Connection.
Honestly, if I was running for governor of Ohio, my platform would be one plank, and it would be like, I will preserve Hard Times.
I think that the newspaper that they published with her was actually the Cincinnati Reporter instead of the one that she made, which I thought was kind of interesting that they chose not to do the one that she types out herself.
Kind of dark that they did that. But I'm wondering if we can kind of like, go back in time before we get into the newspapers of it all. And Kit, I'd love to hear more about like how you came to American Girl, like what really lit you up about it, and sort of like how you interacted with it.
Yeah. So growing up, I was a Samantha. I think my parents, it was fantastic. I think my parents just did, they picked the one that looked the most like me, and I have brown hair, brown eyes. So they were like, yeah, she'll be a Samantha. And then my sister, who has blonde hair, blue eyes, got Kirsten. And I was kind of telling, I know, not fair, but it's fine. I was telling Mary and Allison kind of off air that, like material wise, I was all about Samantha. I really loved like the doll itself with her and everything. But as far as the books and my experience with reading the books as a child, I very like specifically remember reading the Kirsten books, or actually having the Kirsten books read to me, because it was like the first time that I ever kind of experienced death and having to learn about it. And so I think it like really stuck with me because it was my father reading us those books. And it was funny, I mentioned it to him like a while ago that like I have this very vivid memory of that happening, and he was like, I don't remember reading you those books. But to me it was like really important because it's like the first time that we discussed something like that. And so those two were kind of like the formation of my love for American Girl doll. And as far as like Kit goes, she was released when I was pretty young, but she would have been probably more like my younger sister's speed. But I do remember the movie and being young enough to like enjoy the movie when it had come out and everything. I think I was probably right about the same age Kit would have been in the movies and everything. So I do remember seeing it, really enjoying it. It went on with every vacation trip with us. I think that was one of the movies in the car that we brought. So a lot of memories with American Girl doll.
I feel like saying that you grew up with Kit is the politest way possible to say that you're younger than us. And that's been a subject of discussion on our Discord community, where people have talked about whether they remembered the subprime mortgage crisis and it was formative for them, or whether it's something that they heard about afterward. And that's become a kind of dividing line. It's like the Kit movie is released, the subprime mortgage crisis occurs, whether you were a child or an adult, or we were like we were in adulthood, but like right about to graduate college. I think that's like a new polite form of generational marker. Like I grew up with Kit. Like it's a polite way to say that you don't need as much skin cream as us yet.
Wow.
That's fair. Someone told me the other day that they had Julie, and I didn't even know who Julie was.
She's coming. Yeah, she's coming.
Okay, that's fair. I didn't know who she was either until I'd never been to an American Girl doll store before, and we were sent there to do like a photo shoot, and they had Julie, like a big Julie display, and it was mind-blowing to me. I was like, disco, basketball, she lives in San Fran, like, what's up, Julie? But I mean, in the 70s, I'm like, is her historical crisis Watergate?
No.
Okay, well,
it is
so
democratic,
I don't know.
though. She has a democratic crisis of her own.
Okay, interesting. Well, we'll have to wait till I get there, I guess. I purposefully try not to learn because I'd rather be surprised. But I love the story about your dad reading to you Kirsten's books and like having that be the first occasion for a conversation about grief, because it just seems like that's such a special memory for you, you know, even as you've like grown up and moved on to other things, like to remember that first conversation with a parent about something that, you know, ends up being, you know, sadly an important, you know, commonplace for everybody.
It was very interesting because like I hadn't thought about it in such a long time. And then like when the pandemic hit, I was in grad school and I was doing some work with American Girl dolls and material culture and stuff. And I had thought about using one of the dolls in my material culture class, and I was starting to think a little bit about grief and everything that had accompanied it. And I was like, well, it's very interesting because I think the first time I did like have a conversation with an adult about this that I truly remember was because of Kirsten.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. What kinds of stuff did you do in grad school on American Girl?
So I had one project that was within the material culture class that I did. I didn't end up using them very much in my thesis or anything, unfortunately, but within the one course I did attempt to create, and I was doing like layers with it, kind of like I was mentioning off air, where I was trying to talk about the dolls and the materiality of like the doll itself, as well as them being characters within a book, and then the book also being a material. And one thing that I thought was super interesting was obviously the books trying to talk about the historic dolls that the dolls would have had as characters. So I did create a website at one point that tried to discuss the history of the dolls that the dolls' characters would have had. So like layers upon layers, and trying to do like
very meta
show pictures. Yeah, it was very interesting to look through too. And some of the historic dolls that have like survived for so long that people like Kaya may have had, and are like kind of behind paywalls. Like you can't really see pictures of them the way that you would think you could. So it's very interesting to try to like delve into those things and find those. But that was like my main focus with them. And then I did focus a little bit on Addie because I went to grad school in Philadelphia. So kind of having a discussion about the placement of Addie and the importance of her story within being in Philadelphia. As like a free city and things of that nature. And I used her story as a stop in a walking tour that I did of Philadelphia for my final thesis.
This is all extremely impressive. I have one question for you. Now that
Yes.
I know that you were in Philadelphia, did you ever find the doll museum? Allison, feel free to chime in. We attempted to go to this doll museum. Do you even know what I'm talking about? And it was like, for us to get there, by the end of it, I think I was hangry. I don't really remember what was going on, but it was closed when we got there, and that was a huge tragedy.
It is permanently closed now, unfortunately. However, I did not do this on purpose at any point. I lived right above it when I first moved to Philadelphia. Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So it's like right between like Dauphin Street and I can't even think of Broad Street as like the main thoroughway in Philadelphia. And so it was like near Dauphin Street and like the stop that you get off right there. And I lived like right above it. Yeah. It was like in the same block that I was on. And I was like catty corner to it. And so I accidentally did that. I had no idea it was there. And then.
So did you get in there? Like what happened?
Unfortunately, it was closed. I think it shut down in 2016, maybe 2017. It still has like the sign outside and everything, but it hasn't been open for a while, unfortunately. I think the whole collection is still in there, at least the last that I had looked like 2 years ago when I was doing this project in grad school and
I'm
everything.
in shock.
Yeah. It was funny because I didn't even realize, because I never really went that way. It was like a little bit further down the block, but very close by. I always went like the opposite direction. And so when I saw that there was a doll museum in Philadelphia, I was like, oh. And then I saw that it was like 500 feet for me. And I was like, oh. No, that it was right there.
Oh my God. Iconic. It's so bleak that the collection is still in the closed museum. It's like, it's turning from like a child's dream scenario to like a horror movie set. Like,
Yeah.
Can somebody please, if you're listening to this, report back to us, like, if you've been inside, if you know information about this. Like, I just can't believe I randomly was, like, going to ask you about this and you used to live, like, right there. Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think there's
Very
some Temple students that have written, like, blog posts and things. If you search it, you can find some people who have definitely been there that could be cool to talk to. It was funny, actually, when I was, like, looking it up and I mentioned to my now fiance that, like, it was really close by. He was like, oh, I know that's there. And I was like, how did you know that's there? And he's like, well, in Pokemon Go, it's one of the stops. I was like, oh, okay. I had no idea.
It continues to be a part of history. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Wonderful. And I love that you made your own, like, virtual doll museum and that meta topic. Allison, you were, like, vigorously shaking your head when Lauren was talking about how you can't even see images of dolls of the dolls. Is that something that you've been tracking too?
Yeah, it's interesting because some of these kind of random accessories, they're worth almost as much as an American Girl doll now. So you can, I acquired my Kit doll just last year or earlier this year for a pretty good price. But, like we've really tampered with the Sombrita market in the Josefina world. It's the strangest things that have,
say that.
I know we have to go there, but it's the strangest things that have kind of a huge price tag at this point. But part of what's been, striking is people have shared with us, for example, the hobo kit that is associated with the Kit doll is hundreds of dollars in some cases, that there are these different accessories. I'm so curious, you have this great Philadelphia connection that you explored while you were there doing graduate work. And we've had the pleasure before of talking to someone at Historic Stagville, which is where there's documents for the creation of Addie. We've talked to people at the Tenement Museum, like all these different institutions. Is there like an Ohio base that's still animated about Kit Kittredge, or is that something I've completely fabricated?
So it's interesting because I tried to do some work on that and like see if there was like a place that is kind of really tied to Kit. And as far as it goes, as I understand it, no, but I'm also located in Columbus and not Cincinnati. So there could possibly be like a place in Cincinnati that is like really tied to her story that I just am not aware of, to be completely honest with you. If I had to guess, I think it would be like really cool if one of the newspapers had like some kind of interest in her and everything. But unfortunately, I think most of the ones that would have been around while Kit was being created are no longer even open. So there may have been some kind of a tie and people involved from the newspapers in Cincinnati that are no longer open. It's interesting to I think it's very interesting in general that like Cincinnati was chosen over like a Cleveland, because a lot of the points that you guys talked about in one of the podcasts about why Cincinnati was like the spot that they picked also would have hit for like a place like Cleveland. And I think it's very interesting that I would love to pick someone's brain about like what the choice was there and stuff. But as far as I know, no. But I think it'd be really cool to talk more about the people who are involved in the creation of her and figure out if there was like a place that was really like tied to her creation besides just the city of Cincinnati.
We know that Valerie Tripp, she did a lot of interviews, and I think she was like such a known quantity by the time Kit came out that she did a fair amount of press where she talked about her process. And it's different from other characters where we've had to like talk around people or kind of like figure things out other ways. But a few Ohio newspapers like ran a bunch of articles when Kit came out. But I think maybe there wasn't that same kind of direct energy because there isn't like one obvious cultural institution. Like, I don't think the Cincinnati Enquirer is trying to like champion a 10-year-old journalist from fiction. Like that maybe isn't like what they're doing while they're trying to like struggle to keep subscribers. But, you know, different opportunities could have happened.
Another thing that's interesting too is like some of the older characters that would be farther back on like the timeline have the opportunity to be in cities where there might be more history in the sense of like buildings still existing that were preserved and things of that nature. But with Kit in Cincinnati, there's, I think probably the most popular building would be the train station that's there. The Union Terminal, I think is what it's called. And that wouldn't even open until like 1934 or 35, I believe. So like any kind of like land or like important landmark that could be tied to her wouldn't have even been open in Cincinnati until later. So I just don't know if like that was even something that they could do.
Like, is this the legacy of Pete Rose? Like, what if Valerie Tripp was a huge Pete Rose Cincinnati Reds fan and was like, it's Cincinnati, and they're like, Val, but there's no architecture and like gentrification and urban development, and she's like, I don't care.
It's interesting with the Reds because like obviously Kit is a huge fan of the Reds and everything, but during the Depression they would have been awful. They would have been like one of the worst teams. I think they finished I think they finished last for like 8 years in a row like during that era. And so that's another thing where like Kit has a tie to it, but like actually historically it wouldn't have been like super crazy for many people in the area.
Yeah, it is really interesting the more that you kind of draw this out, like why Cincinnati? And I would love to know more information about that. But I'd love to kind of get into kind of the kit of it all in newspapers with you. Like, I think in reading these books for me, and I don't know how you feel as more of an expert, like the culture of newspapers now is so really sad. Like so many newspapers keep closing or they're bought by venture capital groups and totally just robbed of resources and then they close. I live in Connecticut. We have the Hartford Courant, which is, I guess, like the oldest continuously printed newspaper, allegedly, according to its masthead. And I mean, it almost has like virtually no staff at this point. It was bought by venture capital a couple of years ago, and it's really sad. There's like almost no local news. Like it's slowly sort of like dissipating. And the Kit books are really wonderful, and that it kind of reminds us of this like really rich newspaper culture. And I'm wondering kind of how you enter that as someone who, you know, helps preserve that history.
So I did like a lot of kind of prep work before talking with you guys, interested in specifically the Cincinnati newspapers. And so it was interesting to kind of learn about, especially during like the Depression, like the newspapers that would have been very popular in Cincinnati at the time. And there would have been about 3 that were circulating like pretty widely. And it would have been the Cincinnati Post, the Cincinnati Enquirer, and the Cincinnati Times-Star, I believe was the name of it. And those 3 were pretty popular. And it's also interesting because of Cincinnati's like geographical position. They're also very close to Kentucky, like very close, border, very, very like you can walk across. And so a lot of other newspapers that were popular in Cincinnati would have been Kentucky newspapers. So that's kind of a very unique position for a place like Cincinnati. And a lot of Cincinnati newspapers, like vice versa, were also very popular in Kentucky and had their own run. Like they were printed in Cincinnati and then just like shipped over the river to go into Kentucky, even though they were owned by the same people in Cincinnati. And so like that kind of informs an interesting way to like think about what we would consider like local news. But in a place like Cincinnati, it goes from one state to another state, and yet it's the same printer and publisher. And so like thinking about that is really interesting. And then like as far as Kit goes, I was kind of mentioning off air, I think that she would have been most interested in one like the Cincinnati Post, because that would have been the more like progressive newspaper of the time. And so kind of looking at their stuff from the time is very interesting, and what she would have potentially been interested in and what they were publishing. And like local news, I think my favorite part when I was looking at it are all of the like yo-yo and bowling tournaments they talk about that are happening in Cincinnati during 1932. Yeah. And like I could just see like Kit being like super into like yo-yoing and like becoming like super into it, because it's probably not a very expensive toy. It's something that like many people could participate in. And so stuff like that is just like super interesting in the paper. And then you obviously have like the national crisis and everything happening. That's also a huge discussion, but seeing like the very small tidbits in it where you could see like a child with like something like a yo-yo is super cool to look at too.
I'm curious what you make of what I think is actually like a pretty important difference between the Kit books and sort of like the Kit canon and the way that she's portrayed in the film. Because I think one of the ways that Kit kind of is presented as an even more vibrant and interesting character is through the film. They make her part of a newsroom. Like they have her storm into a newsroom. She's known by reporters, and there's really not that much of an emphasis on her making a homemade newspaper, right? Like maybe with the thought that that would seem sort of juvenile or like less than, which I don't think it is. But throughout the books, there's such an emphasis on her having a home production with her friend Sterling and her friend Ruthie, and finally kind of culminating in this letter to the editor. And in the film, she's part of a journalist culture in Cincinnati. She knows the person who leads the paper. What do you make of kind of that difference, and maybe not the choice to do that, but like why I think such an even further departure from reality, right? It's extraordinary enough to make your own newspaper as a kid. It's really a big leap to think of a kid in a newsroom as almost a colleague in 1934.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a very interesting change. I have to assume that part of it was like theatrically, how do you just like record a child like typing? Like, is there how much entertainment could there be in something like that? So I wonder what like the shift in the thought process there was, like how close could we get to something like this, but still make it about like Cincinnati news and Kit being a part of this process. And another thing, so while there is that side to it, is also interesting because I'm sure while they probably like collaborated with American Girl Doll and like creation of this movie and stuff, in terms of like them selling like accessories for Kit or something like that, you would think that the writing portion, and her creating her own newspaper would almost be a better selling point because she could like type on her typewriter, and that might intrigue kids to get involved in wanting to like write their own story and buy a typewriter or like things of that nature. So it is a very odd switch, but I don't know like how much it has to do with like Kit as a character versus like what they thought they could do like theatrically, I guess, with it. But I guess like historically, yes, it does not make tons and tons of sense for her to be like storming into the newsroom. And I think there's like a quote at one point too in the movie where they're like, oh, like a penny per word or something very odd like that.
Yeah.
Or like that is definitely very off as well. But yeah, I'm not sure like what the thought process was behind the change. I have to assume it's probably something like that, and probably just to give Kit a bit of a boost because she's like a detective in the movie, you know, so it kind of like adds this like intrigue that she's a very like confident person. Like she can burst into a room where she's never met someone and like ask questions and, you know, solve these problems and stuff. And so I think that's probably where that comes from. But I really like the books and the fact that like she is it's almost like you said, like juvenile, but it's I don't see like lots of kids possibly doing something like that. It's still a very like adult thing to be doing in a childlike manner. And so I think it's like a really cool portion of her books. I wish it would have been included.
I think it's an interesting archival question, actually, because I think it would be hard to recover how many kids were doing this kind of stuff at home unless it's saved somewhere. So I think, like, I know that there's one collection that's famous in New Hampshire of kids who made their own magazine called Chit Chat in like the turn of the 20th century. And it's really fascinating. If you want to look it up, they made their own illustrations. It's beautiful. And it's also loaded, but we have that because the parents saved it, and then they, as adults, saved it and donated it to, I think, Dartmouth. But it'd be interesting to know, like, and it was interesting when you said that it wouldn't work that way about like a penny per word or whatever. Like, what kind of background can you offer us about like what newspapers were like in this time that might be different from now?
So I don't have like tons to offer on what like the pricing of like a reporter might be paid for writing or things of that nature. But I do think that there is, and kind of going back to like that idea of like local news, there's a little bit more of an emphasis on like the here and now, like especially with the idea that like most of these papers are publishing every single day. While newspapers still do that today, there is, I think, less of an emphasis on like what is happening in like this borough of Cincinnati on like tomorrow so that you can go do. I think like there's a very different focus. And so while there might be like that local happening in newspapers today, it's not necessarily as like drawn out because you could just like Google it. You know, if you wanted to find something to do next week, you could look on like an Eventbrite or something like that. And so I think there is almost this sense of like community building that's happening in newspapers a lot more in like the time that Kit would have been reading them. And like kind of going back to like the yo-yo competition, you know, like that is something that like if Kit would have read that and been interested in attending, or if she wanted to compete or whatever it may be, that's something that like she could have taken a look at, seen like 4 days prior, because it's mentioned probably like the whole week leading up to the event. And then once she goes, she gets to see it and she gets to be a part of it and like witness it in person. And then like 2 days later in the newspaper, they're talking about like what she actually got to see, and she gets to kind of relive it in a way. And I don't know if we do that as much anymore either with this kind of like reliving within newspapers, because I think kind of like the recounting of stories has kind of fallen to places like YouTube and things of that nature, where we do a lot of, I mean, we're doing a podcast right now, you know, like an audio version of recounting these stories and these events that are happening. And so I think there's like a very different emphasis on what's happening. So the newspapers obviously talk about news, but they also go beyond that and do a lot of that community building and recounting and storytelling that I don't know that we do as much anymore.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit, because I think this will be interesting for people who maybe don't work in a historical background, or maybe they're just getting started and they're kind of interested in doing some research. There's this kind of like popular visual of the person like rushing into a hometown library, like sitting at a microfilm machine and like solving a crime, right? Like poring over the microfilm and like, but they like immediately find the exact thing that they're looking for. And when you said that you looked at some microfilm and you looked at some different kinds of digital documents to prepare to talk to us today, I kind of have a pretty good idea in my mind of what I think you mean. But I wonder if you could talk about that as kind of a way of like opening the door to your profession, especially for people who are thinking about a journey into history. Like, it isn't the way it is on HBO, where someone has 5 minutes at a machine, they find the exact article they're looking for, and the case is solved. So what is it like to actually do that type of work?
Yeah. See, it's funny you mentioned that because my mind immediately jumps to like Stranger Things this last season. They're on like that microfilm and they find the exact,
I was doing a rewatch and they literally like talked to the librarian who is cranky because she had hooked up with one of the detectives, but she like begrudgingly shows them the card catalog.
Love that.
And I think there's two things happening in that scene, one of which is like it does remind you, and I think in an important way show like this person has real expertise that is needed. Like this person needs to guide you on how to use this thing. And yet the process takes seconds and they immediately find the exact thing they're looking for, which isn't really where the joy of researching newspapers comes from and is not realistic about the process either.
Yeah. So when it comes to like microfilm specifically, I think that it's a whole different beast than like digitized newspapers, because I think fortunately and unfortunately in some ways, but with like digitized newspapers, we have OCR, which creates like that transcript and makes it searchable. And while that can be very helpful, it could also mean you're possibly missing something because it didn't happen to be searched effectively the way that we would assume it should be because of technology and things like that. So with microfilm, you kind of have to dig in like a little bit deeper. You have to read word for word. It's not searchable in that way. And like for anyone who's never really experienced having to use a microfilm machine, you know, thinking about, so like I mentioned, I went through the Cincinnati Post from 1932, and thinking about that right now, that meant having to go through about 9 reels for just 1 year. And so like I mentioned, like the Cincinnati Post would have been published every single day. So there could be a very different experience if you're looking at a newspaper that's published like weekly or biweekly. That might be a very different research experience than something that's happening every day. Something that's really interesting with one that would be like a daily is you're going to see repeated stories like pretty frequently, especially like in 1932, if you're looking at 1932, like every day from March forward, there's going to be some kind of article about like the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, stuff like that. So like understanding that like there's almost a repetitiveness to things, and they might say like similar things. And then sometimes like you could get caught up in like the repetitiveness and like miss something that you are looking for because the Lindbergh baby takes like 8 headlines for 8 days in a row, and you miss like the small one down in the right hand corner that talks about like prohibition or something, which might be what you're trying to focus on, but it doesn't get as much attention in like that whole month. And so it's a very interesting like research process to have to use microfilm, especially when you can't like zoom out or zoom in the way that you like could on a computer and things of that nature. And so I think it's like very different, especially for someone entering like this field and doing newspapers, the way we still preserve them to digitize them, especially within like the Chronicling America standards and things like that. And the NDNP standards would be to take the physical newspapers and microfilm them. And that's the preservation copy. And then you digitize from the microfilm. And I think a lot of people may not realize that, because I think a lot of times when we think about like preservation, when it comes to like digital things and people involved in like the history field or archives, it's just like a scanner, and all you have to do is just scan like the photograph and you're ready to go. Right. But with newspapers, it's a whole different beast. And doing research with them is a whole different beast, because to try to digitize just one issue is a lot more work than like 4 photographs from one collection. So it's kind of crazy to think about like the difference between like microfilm and then digital newspapers, and then also digital newspapers versus any other kind of like digital archival content.
I just think one of the values of microfilm too, or being able to look at like actual physical copies of newspapers. I remember someone in graduate school had mentioned this, and I like found it to be very true. Actually having to look across a paper as opposed to being able to do a keyword search, there's a lot that's lost about context. And I think one of the exciting things about poring over microfilm or working with real newspapers, or in some scenarios where you're just like given full access to a bunch of records, I was doing research about a particular event that occurred in the 1970s, and I couldn't find coverage. And I kind of quickly realized that part of why I wasn't finding what I was looking for was everyone was concerned about what had happened at Chappaquiddick with the other Kennedys. No relation to you for the sake of this conversation. And so this event that felt really important to me that I was looking for wasn't getting the coverage that I was expecting in local and regional newspapers because all eyes were on the trial that was about to happen around Chappaquiddick. And so that was kind of a moment for me of realizing, like, we are asking certain questions about the past, and the papers are telling us the story of what people think is important in the moment. And that kind of stuck with me of, we have made this moment that I was researching out to be extremely important when it was actually happening. People didn't have that awareness. They were very much focused on other things. You see this with stuff like the Lizzie Borden trial. You don't understand how pervasive the Lizzie Borden trial is until you're researching something else in that same time frame of the murder or the incident, and it's everywhere. And like you're saying, it's the same stories repeated over and over, just slightly different changes. And something that like we kind of know of because we know about the Associated Press, the way that people are inserting stories from other papers just over and over on repeat.
Mm-hmm.
The Lindbergh baby is a great example, but happened all the time.
It's funny that you mentioned like us not realizing the importance of like an event until like we're looking back on it, because one of the things that I tried to go look up so that we could have like a discussion on it was the announcement of like Roosevelt winning. And it was such a boring article that I was like, this isn't even worth talking about. And I remember I took a picture of it and I sent it to my fiance and I was like, I thought this was going to be much more interesting. But it's just, it's the exact same kind of like announcement that we would receive today, just on the front page instead. But it's not like they don't really go into depth on anything. They're just like, this person likely to win, And so thinking about that was very interesting because I thought that would be much more of a discussion in the papers. And I mean, leading up to the election and the actual election day was much more interesting than the actual like announcement that he had won. And so I thought that was really interesting.
What did you think was interesting about the lead up?
There's so much discussion about Hoover. And to my surprise,
is it
less
positive?
No. Less about Hoover and people's like economic situations, which is what I had kind of expected, and more about people's displeasure with Hoover and the fact that he was into like a dry agenda and was for prohibition and was not changing his stance when so many people were really pushing for prohibition to end. And I mean, that was like one of Roosevelt's, like running points and things. And so it was very prevalent in the Cincinnati Post, just like this discussion. Almost like every cartoon was about taxes, but specifically about beer taxes and how like bootleggers were just making free money because we weren't charging sales tax on beer or anything because it was illegal. And so it was very interesting to see tons of articles from doctors. I don't know if they actually were saying like beer is healthy. It should be legal.
Wow.
We should be allowed to do all these things. And so that was very interesting. And the fact that like most of the discussion about Hoover was tied to prohibition kind of shocked me. I hadn't expected that. And then a lot of discussion about like where he was, like if he was traveling and in a different state, like what he was doing that week. And those were pretty much the discussions with him. And then everything that had to do with Roosevelt leading up to the election was kind of just like, he's winning in all these primaries. He's really kicking butt, like
Yeah.
I think he's definitely going to win. Here's the margin we think it's going to happen in. But yeah, it was very interesting to see. But the actual announcement was just kind of dry. It was like, yeah, here's how much he's expected to win by. And that was it. And I was like, oh, nothing fun.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to pick up on what Allison said, too, that I think a lot of, if you're new to history, you might want to dip your toe in. Like, newspapers are such a great place to start because of that context that it offers you. That's so different from so many other sources, right? Like, you could, if you want to go on Chronicling America, I was talking with you before and saying I love Chronicling America, and I mention it on the show a lot. But it lets you go in and pick a state and pick any date or a window of dates, and you can see, like, what people are talking about in newspapers, and seeing like what are in side-by-side columns together is often really surprising. Like there's a huge national story and then something that's like hyper local, like the reports of like what kids had birthday parties or whatever, which I love. Yeah. Like I love the local news and frankly gossip. Like I love recovering historical gossip in newspapers. And I think the context of those is really, it's hard to compare it to other sources. And for me, it reminds me of that moment, and I haven't seen Stranger Things, don't judge, but you know that iconic scene in Now and Then when Christina Ricci and the gang are looking for a newspaper article about her mom's death? Are you too young for this, Lauren?
I haven't seen it. I'm sorry.
What? I'm putting the show on pause. We all have to watch Now and Then right now, but just know that movie and Christina Ricci made me feel things, and particularly that scene because it's so dramatic. But she's in like a basement. It's like a realistic depiction of what research is really like, where it's like you're in a basement, you're looking at, in this case, like bound newspapers, and you're literally like no index, just rifling through, hoping to find, in her case, a report of the car accident that took her mom's life, and she finds it, and it ends up being like super dramatic. But that always reached me because it's like, oh wow, historical sources can have personal history or, you know, family history and like these national stories as well.
Yeah, I think people are often shocked that when like genealogists go back to find information, that a lot of times that information is like found in the newspaper. It goes beyond like birth and marriage certificates and things like that. It's like, oh, was this person mentioned in the Cincinnati Post in 1930? Okay, well, they probably live here. Like, I think it's very interesting that like outside of like a historian or genealogist, a lot of people wouldn't consider that like a place to look. But I love doing it. I think it's so fun to like see stuff. And when I'm digitizing things and doing like quality review and stuff, I always find very, very interesting things and love to take pictures and send them to people. Lots of dogs too.
Dogs.
Sorry.
In the paper.
Yes.
Something I noticed when I did kind of like the browsing feature, because I got interested in the Ohio memory pages and I was trying to figure out, okay, what kind of objects can I look at and what kind of papers? And just because I don't know a lot about Ohio history, I was surprised by how many newspapers were in different languages. And I think that's also very much like something that has changed in our world today. Like the part of the country that Mary and I live in, there were a lot of communities where people self-published papers or had papers that had a certain circulation in like German or French, or I think the ones I was seeing were Polish. Can you talk a bit about like maybe some of the challenges or like the opportunities you have with that, with things that may or may not be in a language that you can speak?
Mm-hmm. So I think in Ohio, probably the most prevalent would be German newspapers. There would probably be a lot of Polish ones, like you mentioned as well. That would probably be more Columbus area. German would probably pervade like Cincinnati, Columbus, like pretty much the whole state of Ohio. There's a lot of German ancestry in Ohio. So to look at those newspapers is very interesting because normally when it comes down to it, I don't have the expertise, and usually people at like Ohio History Connection may not have the expertise to actually be like reading these line by line. It usually comes down to, can we identify what language it is? Can we identify like the history of the paper? Like if you're looking at Chronicling America, often they'll give you kind of like the brief history of like the newspaper and stuff. So can we identify like the title, what language it's actually in. And like beyond that, we're usually not able to do a ton. Sometimes we do try to like reach out to someone who might be able to speak German at say like Ohio State or another school, or just generally someone who's an expert that could help us with something like that. But occasionally and frequently, like we unfortunately don't have the resources, and I would assume most other historic sites or libraries unfortunately wouldn't have the resources to be doing the work of like transcription or like OCR within another language, unfortunately. We do, however, try really hard to ensure that like the other language newspapers do end up published onto a site like Ohio Memory or Chronicling America within this past grant cycle for like a grant for Chronicling America, and to ensure that we continue to digitize newspapers. We make sure that we discuss labor newspapers, other language newspapers, and anywhere that kind of has a gap. So there's 88 counties in Ohio. Where haven't we published like a newspaper from online yet, and things like that? And oftentimes there could be like a German or Polish or like Jewish newspaper that's published in like Yiddish or something else that we like may not have the access to know exactly what it's about. So we hopefully we reach out for like funding to do things like that and try to, but yeah, it's a different process, and unfortunately we can't do as much with it as we would like, but we do try to get them online so people who can read German have access to it at least, but that's kind of where it's at with that.
I'm wondering, as a person who's been in the archive, it sounds like you're doing the Lord's work, taking your own photos of dogs you find in the newspaper, like reading different stories. Like, this is iconic. This is what I would be doing. Like, I get really invested in the ads and the stuff that's like seemingly meaningless, but not to me. Like, if you were Kit, like if you were brave enough to imagine yourselves in the shoes of one Kit Kittredge, what stories, like what do you think, national stories, local stories, whatever you choose, what do you think would have captivated her when she was, getting into newspapers and growing up and, even into adulthood, whatever time frame you want to talk about?
So with Kit, I think she would have been very interested in like the time frame that we're talking, like her as in these books in like 1932 through like 34. There was a lot of publications and like articles about teachers going hungry right now during the Depression, at least that I found. I wrote down one of the titles because I thought that it was just like a shocking one that would get someone's attention. The article is called 7,000 Teachers Famished. And that was in the 1932 Cincinnati Post. And I really think something like that would like really catch Kit's attention, just with how empathetic she is. I know like the whole story with trying to help kids her age and stuff, but I think something like that would really catch her attention because she goes to school and she talks to her teacher, and her teacher is constantly trying to get them to do the food drives and things like that as well. And I think if she saw something like that, she would be like, but who's helping him? Like, or her. I think her teacher's a man, I believe in the books, but like who is helping you? Are you struggling, like, and trying to have like a frank conversation? Because, she feels that shame sometimes with like trying to make sure that her true nature and like the poverty that her family's experiencing is kind of hidden and stuff. And so I think that she might be able to have a frank conversation with like a teacher about that. And so I think that would be something that would really catch her attention in the newspapers. And then potentially later on in her life, it would be 1940, I believe, that the Reds win. I don't think it's called the World Series yet, but I could be totally wrong. They win the world title for the first time since like the 1910s, I believe. And I think that would really catch her attention. I like to think that she, was very, very into it. I think she probably, if I had my dream world of what happens to Kit Kittredge, she goes on to work for the Cincinnati Post, and she's like the sports correspondent. Like, she's going to Reds games and she's talking to the players and reporting. But I'm sure that's not realistic, but I would love that was what happened to her if it could have been. I think she'd love it, getting to talk to all the players. Because I don't know if she could ever have played the way that she would have loved to, but at least she could be involved.
I think that's always an interesting tension in American Girl, and like part of why the movie really did throw me off, right? Because I think then or now, the idea of any kid kind of storming into a newsroom and like demanding bylines and like trying to get stories, like it's funny, right? It's a movie, like it's good, it works. As you're kind of poring over these newspapers, are you noticing patterns about women just in general getting bylines, or like who seems to be getting the most coverage? Are they having to pull from just like national outlets at times? Like what kinds of things were coming up as you were looking at them?
So within the Cincinnati Post, like specifically, there's probably about 5 pages that are dedicated to like women specifically. And it seems kind of like a Dear Dottie kind of section on one page, like, let me ask advice. Here's these questions, please answer them. I don't think the reporter or like the person who's actually answering the questions is named, but I'm sure I would assume or hope that it's a woman if they're allegedly writing to a woman for advice. And then beyond that, they have like further discussions. The Cincinnati Post was interesting because it talked specifically about like relationship advice. And then the second page would be like all motherhood advice. Like, my child's doing this. How do I react to this? How do I maintain like a valuable relationship with my child while also being like the parent? Like, how am I not a friend, but also like still maintaining a good relationship with them? And I thought that was kind of really heartening to see in like 1930s, you know?
Yeah.
It was very interesting, especially I think most of the questions were about like a mother and a daughter, less about like raising a son. But there was like a lot of discussion about that. And then there was also a major focus with the ads in the newspaper directed towards women. It seems like most of the ads were actually directed towards women, which I thought was very interesting. Besides car ads, it seems like most of them were about like dresses and shoes for women's fashion, and then coffee. Those were like the big ones. But it's interesting to me, ads seem to continue running like no problem. Like people were still paying for them. And I mean, I think if we didn't have the knowledge of like the Great Depression and only looked at ads, like I'd have no idea that anything was different during this time period, which is very interesting to think about and something that I kind of made note of. But it is interesting that all of them seem to be directed towards women.
We talked about that a lot too, with Kit's mom really seeming to be the head of the family's finances and like having the best grip on the family's finances. And probably the newspapers are reinforcing it, but they're basing their ad campaigns on a belief that women are making those choices. And it's interesting, you talk about kind of like the dynamic between parents and kids changing. We see that in the Kit books where like the way that they're close changes between book 1 and book 6 and what Kit is led into. Thinking about how many kids were really vital wage earners in the 1930s, you know, part of the pushback against Roosevelt really comes from families saying, we won't survive if you don't allow children to be wage earners. And when you think of the families where kids are wage earners, it's usually multiple children, and they're usually bringing in more than half of the family income. And so that really changes the dynamic, especially if you're a teenager and you have any kind of awareness. People talk in mill towns and different industrial towns all the time. They never saw their pay. We're not talking like 1800. We're talking less than 100 years ago. It went directly to parents. That's going to change your relationship with an authority figure, knowing that like you're paying the rent as much as they are.
And I think that's interesting to think about in like the Kit book, specifically with the brother. I can't remember his name. Charlie, yeah. And something that's really interesting with the Kit books too with Charlie is the fact that he's in the CCC, correct? And he goes to Montana. There were those active programs also happening in Cincinnati. So it's very interesting to me that like as an author, she chose to send him all the way to like Montana and make him not a part of the story anymore, even though he's contributing to the family, making sure that they don't lose their house and things like that with what he's getting paid. And so like the reality of the fact that he would have been involved in like the CCC, but not in Cincinnati is interesting to me. I don't know like tons about how many people would have gone out of state for being a part of the Civilian Conservation Corps, but I did think it was interesting that like he didn't stay in Ohio as part of like the story. I'm not sure if that was normal or not. I know Ohio specifically they had a lot of work with parks, and the highway was like a big deal in Ohio, especially Cincinnati. And he could have potentially been a part of that project.
That's not as cool. Yeah. I think there is something about the fact that like they wanted Charlie because he had to skip college to get muscles and to be part of like a work gang and do telephone poles or something out at Glacier. And I think that's always one of the strengths of American Girl as a brand, which is that you get these national polls, right? Like one of my favorite books that I hadn't read as a kid that we read as adults for this show was Molly's Route 66 Adventure, because we got to go on like an early post-war road trip with her. I think in some ways it's fascinating that we get to learn about another place in the same time. And I think the turn for like Valerie Tripp and others to not make up a place, like Molly is not from a real place, Kirsten is not from a real place, but to say, no, like we're going to choose a real city and you're going to learn about Cincinnati and we're going to send Charlie somewhere else so we can expand your horizons even further. Like if Charlie was coming home every night, there's no room for him. After like digging a ditch for a highway, I think part of what it captures is like Charlie is desperate to get out and have some kind of adventure, and the work in Glacier is probably way worse and horrible, but he always gets to say he did that.
Yeah, that's true too. I didn't even think about like the fact that there probably wasn't even a space for him in the house. And then on top of that, I guess it's a driving force for Kit because she's almost jealous in some of the books that he's like getting to do these things when in reality he's doing like hard labor. And so like trying to come to terms with that, while also being like, well, he gets to be in a different place and experience all these things and go on an adventure.
You talking about the ads too, it's like such a great reminder that newspapers are not reality. And we know that. Like, we know that Facebook is not reality. We know that Instagram is not reality. There is like a bunch of Facebook groups that I'm in for like people who live in the various areas that I live now or have lived. It's like, I know that that's not reality. And yet I look back at a newspaper and I'm like, be a perfect snapshot of this time. Like, tell me exactly what I want to know and like be a perfect representation of that time. And you think about who can afford a newspaper, right? Or like who's actually looking at some of these newspapers, which could have been an expense some people just couldn't afford.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because you can tell the target of the ads not only are women, but probably middle-class women who are definitely impacted by the depression, but still have enough money to spend on potentially a new dress or a new coat because they might possibly need it. And what they're thinking, they're not doing the kit ideal of like doing hand-me-down clothes. They're not doing or at least like these ads are hoping they're not doing this creation of like the chicken feed bag dress and stuff like that. They're really hoping that they can target these women specifically to purchase these new items, even though they may not need them. It was very interesting to see, I think, especially especially the shoes. I was like, I don't know how many people were going out and doing that. Like,
it's interesting to think about like what use Aunt Millie would have had for newspapers in this period.
Aunt Millie would have put them in the chicken coop. They were like,
I was just going to say, they would be like, as a material object, they would be useful to her probably, but maybe the contents would not.
Some kind of paper mache for Kit's birthday party, something like that. It's interesting that Aunt Millie like disappears from the last book in general too, because I think like that's the biggest emphasis on like newspapers. And I think that she could have had like some really interesting like insight into like what could be said in a letter to the editor, like especially with what Kit was trying to do with it. So
for sure.
I think part of what the books show really well is someone like Uncle Hendrik feels like he should be heard in the paper. Like he automatically feels like he is the exact kind of person whose voice should be heard in the paper. And I think Kit like does a really cool job of disrupting that, which is why like the sixth book kind of really packs such a great punch, because we're left in the previous book with this sense that like someone needs to do something, and then Kit actually goes out and does that. Wonder if you could talk kind of briefly about, you know, the tradition of muckraking and like deep investigations, anything that you saw while you were looking through that might be of particular interest, because that's what Kit shows us is like the power of actually like capturing some images and like talking to people in real time and then exposing it in the paper.
So I was like kind of shocked to see that, at least with the Cincinnati Post, beyond kind of this discussion of sports and like the events that are happening with like the previously mentioned like yo-yo competition or like the local high school like bowling team. There wasn't like tons of like journalism specific to like Cincinnati. There was a lot of discussion about, like I said, like the Lindbergh baby and things like that. And I think beyond the Lindbergh baby, there was this very interesting and like intriguing notion from people like reporters in Cincinnati about specifically kidnapping in general. Like every issue of the Cincinnati Post had some kind of kidnapping story that they were discussing, whether it happened in Cincinnati or Ohio or elsewhere. And they really wanted to make sure that people were aware that it was like a danger to you, your children, your potentially like elderly parents, that people were forming these kidnapping rings is what they called them, to potentially get some kind of money because of what I would assume because of the depression. I'm not sure. That seems like the largest like hit from like reporters really wanting to talk about. I like made note of it because I was like, there's something about this on every single day of 1932. But like beyond that, it's interesting to me that there isn't like tons of like investigative journalism happening, but that isn't to say it isn't happening. That was just the Cincinnati Post. They do have a decent amount of discussion on like strikes and things of that nature also happening in Cincinnati. They do a decent job talking about Detroit too, somewhat frequently. I think Ohio and Detroit have like a pretty good relationship a lot of the time. Some of the parts would be like produced here, go up there, and then like the full car would be created. So they do have a decent amount of discussion about things like that. They do a pretty big discussion on like bossism is what they were calling it, which is interesting. I think by 1940, the Post had kind of picked who they thought was best for like political office within Cincinnati. And Cincinnati is unique in the way that they chose to stop electing mayors at some point and had like a city manager, I believe is what they called it. And the Post was like the first to endorse that, which with strong influence from Teddy Roosevelt and from the Taft family in Ohio, which is interesting. And so I'm not sure how much of their stuff is like super deep investigative journalism, the way that like we would view it with muckraking and like Kit and everything. But those are kind of like the big things that they're focusing on in the next, from like the 1910s through like 40s kind of era. Their ties to Taft are pretty interesting. They, I think the Taft family is like part owner of them at one point. The Post owns the Inquirer at one point and the Times Star at another point. They're broken down for violating antitrust laws because they bought all of the Cincinnati newspapers. At some point, I think it's probably, it's wild. I hadn't even thought about newspapers breaking like antitrust laws, but seeing that was very interesting. At some point in like the 60s or 70s, after they're broken apart because they're told like this is in violation of the antitrust laws, they go on to say, okay, well, we're going to operate under a joint operation agreement. And so they basically say that they're going to support each other through the publication up until a certain year. And then after that year happens, the Post goes under because they no longer have like the support from other Cincinnati newspapers. So it's a very interesting road that they were led down. And I would hope that if Kit was working for the Cincinnati Post, she would have retired before 2007 when they no longer were in publication. Yes.
Oh my God. Wow, that's wild. I don't really think about the Taft family post 1912 or so. So it's like wild to now need to know like what else they were getting into.
They were involved in like Cincinnati radio, like pretty strongly as well. At some point, I think it's the Cincinnati Inquirer, like buys a radio station to talk about news, and the Taft family is involved in that. It's very interesting.
Wow, that is.
Yeah. And they're all about like the local politics in Cincinnati as well. I reported on in the Post and the Inquirer regarding the Taft family at large.
That's amazing. I think, like that's another cue too, that newspapers can really help you recover like community and state history. And it seems like in a lot of graduate programs, the focus now is like on telling like national stories, or like micro history or state history has kind of diminished in terms of like fewer people are doing like a thesis on that. But I would love for more people to get into it because like you just described, that sounds like a whole soap opera that now I'm going to have to go get into after this. But, it would be like that's the key place to start is like reading these storylines in newspapers. So that's really fascinating.
Lauren, are there specific things that you would love to direct people to that have to do with your work in terms of websites and like a good place to get started?
Yeah. So if anyone is interested in learning a little bit more about like historic newspapers or like modern newspapers in Ohio, you can always go to Ohio Memory, which is a website that we've kind of discussed a little bit. It has the historic newspapers that I work with. It also has all sorts of digital content from like photographs to letters to other objects that have been digitized just for you to view online. I think we have over 1 million digital archive material pieces on there for people. There's a lot. Yeah. And there is something from all 88 counties in Ohio. So if you're interested in specifically Ohio history, that's a really good resource. And if you're interested in going a little bit beyond like Ohio and newspapers in general, you can always look at Chronicling America, which, as Mary said, is amazing and has all sorts of information about all sorts of historic newspapers. It's kind of fun just to play around with it, even if you're not looking for anything like specific. You can do like a keyword search for like random years and just kind of see like, oh, was this mentioned in Arkansas? Why? Like, I'm just very interested,
yes,
you
like
know?
What's happening. Exactly.
Yeah.
I would recommend starting by like searching your birthday in different years in different states and just see what was going on. Just putting it out there.
I was interested in what happened on April 25th, which was my birthday in 1932. And unfortunately, when I went and looked, it was a kidnapping story. And I was like,
no.
Of course. I was like,
that
good.
is rough karma. I'll put that out there. That is rough karma, but we want better for you. Maybe if you keep looking, we'll find a better story for you, or listeners can. So that's wonderful. And just as a final like suggestion, we care a lot about pop culture on this show. Like, do you have anything that you're currently super into that you want to recommend?
Oh, so this is like, it's like a bad good TV show, like one that you love to hate, but you can't stop watching. The new National Treasure TV show.
Oh, I've seen the first 3 episodes, and Catherine Zeta-Jones's wig alone is worthy of participation. It's so good. I love it. It's crazy.
Yes. And she's like a perfect villain. Like, I think she does such a good job. And so it's fun to watch. It's not like, if you're looking for something that's not serious, but still like holds your attention and you can laugh at it, like, highly suggest that. There's a new episode tonight, which I will probably be doing after this.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Amazing. Allison, anything that you're obsessed with these days?
I was watching Fleischman is in Trouble, which was wonderful. Highly recommend that.
That's good.
Really interesting acting by Claire Danes. So that's pretty high on my list. Been reading a few different novels, but really looking forward to Spare. And also been enjoying The Princess Diaries, which is our Patreon read for this month. Being very grateful I'm not in high school.
Yeah, that's a perennial mood. I just got my copy of The Princess Diaries from the library, so I'll have to get into that. Although I think I will have to finish Spare before that. So I'm, again, recommending it. It's a lot. Even though you would think we're so saturated with Harry and Meghan content, what more can we learn? It is actually worth, I think, your time. I also, guys, don't judge me for this. I'm watching a show that's on a major network, which feels like weird to say in like 2023. Like, I just want to say this. My parents recommended me this show. This is so embarrassing, like a long time ago. And like most recommendations from my parents, which are like, Mimi, we think you'd love this show, NCIS. I'm like, I can't go there with you. Like, I'm happy it exists for you. And I'll watch it when I'm at your house with like joy, but I can't, that's not going to sustain me. They recommended a show called Ghosts on CBS a long time ago. And I was like, wow, thank you so much. And like basically did the equivalent of like putting it up on my fridge and was like, it's right here. And then like, I don't know why over the holiday we decided to watch it. It is so good. Actually, someone else recommended it to me who's like a youth. And I was like, okay, well, if this like youth is telling me it's good, it is so good. Do you guys know what this show is? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I have heard of it, isn't it? Yes. Yeah.
Okay, never mind. But it's like based on a British show for those who don't know. And it's like these 2 people inherit a house that they make a B&B. It's haunted and all the ghosts have interesting historical stories. I find it genuinely funny, and I'm like a dad joke person, so maybe that's me. But the fact that there's like a gay Revolutionary War officer who has like imagined beef with Hamilton and can't believe that Hamilton has like had this glow up that he's had. I don't know. I find like historical pettiness funny. Like, it's just light. It made me laugh. I don't know. If that sounds good to you, I would recommend it. Spare won't make you laugh, or at least it hasn't yet. So, no. But these are all great recs, and I will take all of yours under advisement. So, Lauren, we just want to circle back and say thank you for being here. This has been incredible. I feel like I've learned so much from you, and we just so appreciate you taking the time to share everything with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being able to be a part of it.
And, maybe we can crowdfund like buying the Kirsten books to send to Prince Harry, because I feel like maybe that would help him on his grief journey. If it was meaningful for you, like maybe it would help him. I don't know. Closing thought.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
For his daughter too,
For his daughter. Oh my God. Yeah. Yes. Wow. Okay. Thank you for that, Lauren. So thanks everyone for listening. And Allison, do you want to say where people can find us?
Yeah. So we're at Dolls Lives Pod on Twitter. You can also find us on Instagram, Dolls of Our Lives Podcast. We are on Facebook, believe it or not. We have a website for Dolls of Our Lives Podcast where you find everything from our telephone number to our P.O. box. Lauren, if you'd like people to reach out to you in some kind of way, what would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, anyone who's interested in like Ohio history specifically can follow Ohio History Connection on Instagram at Ohio History. And if anyone is interested in like me specifically, hang on, let me look at my handle because I don't know it. My Instagram is Lavrenalenedy. It's a little goofy. I can spell it. It's LAVRENILENNEDY.
Awesome. And Allison, you can be found
I'm at Allison Horrocks on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all those other things. No carrier pigeons to report just yet. Mary, where could people find you?
I would say at this time, just try to find me on Instagram at Mimi Mahoney, and we'll just like leave it there because I am on Twitter, but it's complicated. So I'm very happy to chat with you on Instagram. This has all been amazing. My head is spinning just like thinking about so much. So thank you again, Lauren, and thank you, Allison, for being here and this conversation. And we'll see you on our next episode.
Thank you.